Rain had a way of making the forest sound alive, and that night it fell so hard that every leaf on the old oak tree seemed to be whispering. Daniel Hale pulled his hood tighter and kept walking, his boots sinking into mud that had not dried in 3 days. He was not supposed to be out this far from Ashford Landing, not after dark, not after the storm warnings the colony had posted that morning. But the fence line needed checking, and Daniel had never been the kind of man who trusted a job to be done unless he did it himself. He had grown up on a farm before the colony ships ever left Earth, and farm habits stuck with a person. Check the fences, check the animals, check twice if the weather turned bad. So he checked, even with thunder rolling somewhere behind the hills and the sky flashing pale green from the storm above the mountains, a color no Earth sky ever made. It was the sound that stopped him first. A thin, broken sound, almost like a kettle left too long on a stove, rising and falling with the wind. Daniel paused at the edge of the tree line, water running down his collar, and listened. It was not any animal he recognized from the colony reports, not a night bird, not one of the burrow foxes that liked to yip at the edge of the fields. It was smaller than that and sadder than that, like something crying because it did not know what else to do. He followed the sound past the fence, past the marker post that told colonists not to go further, and into the shadow of the great tree the local guides called the oak. It was not really an oak, of course. Nothing on this world was really anything from Earth. But it had the same wide branches, the same deep grooves in its bark, and it was the biggest living thing Daniel had ever stood beneath. Lightning lit the sky again, and in that flash of white light he saw the wreckage. Broken shells, some as large as wash basins, lay scattered across the churned earth. Scorch marks blackened the roots of the tree in long streaks, as if something had come through with fire and fury and left just as fast. Daniel's stomach turned. This did not look like a storm had done this. This looked like something had attacked and attacked hard and left nothing standing. Then he saw it. Curled against the base of the tree, half buried in wet leaves, was a small creature no bigger than a large dog, its skin a dull, bruised sort of green, its wings folded tight and trembling against its sides. Its eyes were shut, and its whole body shook with each ragged breath. When it made that crying sound again, Daniel realized with a jolt that he was looking at a baby dragon. He knew what dragons were. Everyone in the colony knew. The briefings had been clear and repeated more than once. Dragons were not animals to be trifled with. They were a power in this part of the galaxy, proud and dangerous, and their nesting grounds were the one place humans were told never, under any circumstance, to go near. Daniel had nodded along in those briefings like everyone else. Stay out of dragon territory. Simple enough rule, until you were standing in the rain looking at a baby that was clearly going to die if somebody did not do something. He crouched down slowly, the mud soaking through his trousers, and held out one hand, palm open, the way he used to calm spooked calves back on the farm. The hatchling flinched at first, drawing back with a weak hiss, its small claws scraping uselessly against the ground. But it was too tired, too cold, and too hungry to keep fighting, and after a moment it simply stopped, breathing hard, staring at him with wide, glassy eyes the color of amber. "Easy," Daniel said quietly, not really sure why he was talking to it, except that talking helped keep his own hands from shaking. "Nobody's here to hurt you, just me." He looked around one more time, scanning the trees for any sign of an adult dragon returning, any shape moving through the storm that might explain the wreckage. There was nothing. No parents circling overhead, no other hatchlings crying somewhere close by, no sign of life at all except this one small, broken creature and the ruin of what must have been its home. Every rule Daniel had ever been taught told him to walk away. Leave it alone. Report it to the council in the morning, and let people who understood dragon politics decide what to do. That was the smart thing, the safe thing, the thing that would not risk turning an entire alien civilization against a colony of barely 10,000 people. But the hatchling made that sound again, that thin, broken crying, and its small body curled in on itself, as if it were trying to disappear. Daniel thought of every animal he had ever pulled out of a ditch or a flooded creek as a boy, and he thought about how none of those animals had ever once cared what species had come to help them. They had only cared that someone had. He shrugged off his jacket, wet as it was, and wrapped it gently around the small, shivering body. The hatchling tensed at first, then as the warmth settled over it went almost still, its breathing slowing just slightly. Daniel lifted it carefully against his chest, feeling how light it was, how fragile, nothing like the terrifying image dragons had in every story he had ever heard. As he turned to carry it back toward the colony lights glowing faintly through the rain, the hatchling's eyes opened wider, and for just a moment they seemed to glow with a soft inner light, amber turning briefly gold. Its small claws found his finger and gripped tight, the way a drowning creature grips the only thing keeping it above water. Daniel looked down at it, rain still pouring around them both, and felt something settle in his chest that he could not quite name. Whatever this was, whatever trouble it might bring, he was not putting it back down. "All right," he said softly, mostly to himself. "Let's get you somewhere warm." Behind them, the old oak stood silent in the storm, its broken roots the only witness to what had happened there, and to the choice one human had just made beneath its branches. The heater in Daniel's cabin had never worked quite right, but that night it ran hotter than it had in months, because Daniel would not stop feeding it fuel. He sat on the floor of his small living room with a towel spread out in front of him, and on the towel lay the hatchling, wrapped loosely so it could breathe, still shaking every few minutes even though the worst of the cold seemed to be leaving its small body. He had no idea what to feed a baby dragon. There was nothing about it in any farming manual he owned, and calling the council at 2 in the morning to ask felt like a very fast way to lose the animal before he had even figured out how to save it. So he did what made sense to him. He warmed a little broth from dried meat, let it cool until it was only lukewarm, and offered it on his fingertip the way he once fed orphaned lambs. The hatchling sniffed at his hand first, cautious, then licked the broth off in one quick motion that startled them both. Within a few minutes it was eating eagerly, its small body no longer shaking quite so hard, its breathing steadier. Daniel let out a breath he did not know he had been holding and allowed himself, just for a moment, to feel something close to relief. "There," he murmured, "that's better, isn't it?" He gave it a name almost without meaning to. Somewhere between the third and fourth spoonful of broth, watching the creature blink up at him with those strange amber eyes, the word rennick simply came to him, and once it had, it felt right, and he never bothered looking for another. Morning came too fast. Daniel had barely closed his eyes on the couch when a firm knock rattled his front door. He opened it to find Sella Vantor standing on his porch, arms crossed, rain jacket still dripping, her expression somewhere between exhausted and furious. "You checked the north fence line last night," she said, not a question. "I did. And somebody at the gate mentioned you came back, carrying something wrapped in your jacket." Daniel stepped aside without answering, which was answer enough. Sella walked in, took one look at the small green shape curled asleep near the heater, and went very still. "Daniel," she said slowly, "do you understand what that is?" "It's a baby," he said. "It was alone. Something tore up its nest and left it to die." "It is a dragon," Sella said, her voice tight. "Do you have any idea what the Compact will do if they learn a human took a hatchling from Compact territory? We are a colony of 10,000 people sitting on the edge of land that belongs to beings who could burn this settlement down without breaking a sweat. There have been treaties, Daniel. Careful, fragile treaties, built over years, and one mistake like this could undo all of it." Daniel looked at the sleeping hatchling, its sides rising and falling gently now instead of shuddering, and felt his jaw tighten. So the plan was to leave it there to die because it might be inconvenient for us politically. "The plan," Sella said, "was never supposed to include this at all." Neither of them had an answer for a long moment. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the colony quiet except for the drip of water off the rooftops. Sella rubbed her eyes and sat down heavily at Daniel's kitchen table. "The council needs to know," she said finally. "Today. Not because I think you did something wrong, but because if the dragons come looking for their missing hatchling and find out we hid it, that will look far worse than if we report it ourselves." Daniel nodded slowly. He hated it, but he understood the sense in it. "Fine. But I'm not handing him over to be locked in some storage room while people argue about paperwork. He's sick, he's scared, and he trusts me right now. That has to count for something." Sella studied him for a moment, then sighed, some of the sharpness leaving her voice. "You always did have a habit of dragging home things nobody else wanted." "Guilty," Daniel admitted. By afternoon, the council had been informed, and predictably, chaos followed. Some members wanted the hatchling handed over to the compact immediately with an apology and full transparency. Others worried that even reporting it would draw dangerous attention to a colony that had, until now, existed quietly under the radar of dragon politics. A few, quietly, wondered if there was some way to make the whole situation simply disappear before anyone official noticed. Daniel sat through the meeting mostly in silence, arms crossed, until someone suggested, almost casually, that the safest option might be to leave the hatchling somewhere dragons were known to patrol and let nature take its course. "No," he said, standing so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "He is not a problem to be dumped somewhere convenient. If the compact wants to come talk to me about what happened, they can talk to me. I'll take responsibility, but I'm not putting a dying baby back out in the rain to save the rest of us an uncomfortable conversation." The room went quiet. Sella, standing near the back, allowed herself the smallest, tired smile. The council eventually agreed, reluctantly, to allow Daniel to continue caring for the hatchling under close watch while they prepared an official message to send toward compact territory, explaining what had happened and requesting contact. It was not a perfect solution. It was not even a comfortable one. But it was, everyone quietly admitted, the only decision that did not involve leaving an infant creature to suffer for the sake of easier politics. That night back in his cabin, Daniel sat beside Rennick as the hatchling slept curled against a folded blanket, its small chest rising and falling steadily for the first time since Daniel had found him. Outside, the sky had cleared, and stars he still did not know the names of stretched out over the colony rooftops. "Whatever happens next," Daniel said quietly, mostly to himself, "I'm not letting them take you somewhere you're not safe." Rennick shifted slightly in his sleep, one small clawed hand curling instinctively around the edge of Daniel's sleeve, as if even asleep, some part of him understood. 3 days after the council sent its message toward compact territory, the sky above Ashford Landing changed color for almost a full minute, shifting from pale blue to a deep, burning orange, as though something enormous had passed close enough to bend the light itself. Farmers in the eastern fields dropped their tools and stared upward. Children were pulled indoors by nervous parents, and Daniel, standing outside his cabin with Rennick curled against his boots, felt the hair on his arms rise even though there was no wind. "That's not weather," he said quietly. Rennick, now noticeably stronger than the shivering, half-starved creature Daniel had carried home, let out a low, uneasy chirp and pressed closer against his leg. He was still small, still young, but his scales had brightened from a bruised, dull green to something closer to deep emerald, and his eyes no longer looked glassy with fear. Still, whatever was happening in the sky clearly unsettled him more than anything had since that first night under the tree. By the time the alert sirens sounded across the colony, calling every able adult toward the central square, Daniel already knew what was coming. He scooped Rennick up despite the hatchling now weighing considerably more than he had a week earlier, and made his way through the gathering crowd toward the square, where Sella was already waiting, her face pale. "They're here," she said simply. The dragon that landed at the edge of the colony did not look like the small, fragile creature curled in Daniel's arms. This one was enormous, its scales a deep storm cloud gray, its wings folding with the practiced ease of something ancient and controlled. When it shifted, the ground beneath its claws cracked slightly, though it made no move to advance further, simply stood at the boundary, waiting, watching the assembled humans with eyes that missed nothing. A single figure stepped forward from beside the great creature, smaller, humanoid in shape but unmistakably not human, wrapped in dark traveling robes that marked, Daniel guessed, some kind of official rank. This was Thal Orec, though Daniel would not learn the name until later. Thal's eyes swept the crowd once, then fixed directly on the small green shape in Daniel's arms, and every scrap of patience seemed to leave the scout's posture at once. "You have something that belongs to my clan," Thal said, voice low and edged with barely restrained anger. "Return it, and perhaps this conversation ends peacefully." The council members standing nearby exchanged nervous glances. Daniel felt Sella's hand tighten briefly around his arm, a silent warning to be careful, but Daniel did not step back. "He's not a thing," Daniel said. "His name is Rennick. I found him alone under a tree, half dead, next to the wreckage of a nest that had already been destroyed before I ever got there. I didn't take him from anywhere. I saved what was left of him." Thal's eyes narrowed, something sharp and dangerous flickering across an otherwise unreadable expression. "Do you understand what you are claiming? That clutch belonged to a bloodline under my clan's protection. If it was destroyed and this hatchling survived, then you are either the reason it happened, or you are lying about what you found." "I'm not lying," Daniel said evenly, holding his ground even as the massive dragon behind Thal shifted its weight, wings flexing slightly in warning. "There were scorch marks on the roots of that tree, broken shells everywhere, no adults anywhere in sight. I got there after it was already over, and I wasn't about to leave a baby to die just because helping him might get complicated." For a long moment, nobody spoke. The tension in the square felt thick enough to cut, council members frozen, colonists watching from windows and doorways, unsure whether they were witnessing the start of a war or the resolution of one. Then Rennick, sensing perhaps the danger in Thal's voice, or simply reacting the way any frightened young creature might, let out a soft, pleading chirp and burrowed further into Daniel's arms rather than reaching toward the dragon scout at all. It was a small thing, barely noticeable to anyone not watching closely, but Thal's eyes caught it immediately, and something in the scout's rigid posture shifted just slightly. "He does not fear you," Thal said slowly, studying Daniel with new and unwelcome curiosity. "That is unusual. Hatchlings of pure blood do not bond easily, and certainly not with outsiders, and never this quickly." "Maybe," Daniel said. "He just knows who's been feeding him and keeping him warm for the last week, instead of leaving him in the mud." Sella stepped forward carefully, hands raised in the universal gesture of someone trying to keep a bad situation from becoming worse. "We sent word the moment we understood what had happened. We are not hiding anything. We only ask that whatever inquiry your clan needs to make, it happens without assuming guilt before the facts are known." Thal studied the humans gathered in the square for a long moment, then looked back at Rennick, who still had not moved from Daniel's protective hold. Slowly, deliberately, the scout raised one hand, not in threat, but in something closer to demand. "I need to examine him," Thal said. "Not to take him, to understand what truly happened at that nest. If your story is true, there are things a hatchling's memory can show that words cannot." Daniel hesitated, glancing down at Rennick, who was watching Thal now with wary but curious eyes rather than outright fear. Slowly, reluctantly, Daniel knelt and allowed Thal to approach, though he did not let go of the hatchling entirely. "If you hurt him," Daniel said quietly, "diplomacy or not, you'll have a problem with me." Thal's eyes flicked toward him, something unreadable passing behind them, something almost, though not quite, like respect. "Understood." As Thal reached out carefully toward Rennick's small head, the great gray dragon behind them let out a low rumble that shook the ground faintly, and the entire square held its breath, waiting to see what the hatchling's memory would reveal, and whether the fragile peace between two very different peoples was about to survive the answer, or shatter completely beneath the old oak's long shadow. Silence fell across the square, the moment Thal Oric placed 2 fingers against the small ridge above Rennick's brow. Nobody in the crowd understood exactly what was happening, only that the scout's eyes had closed, and the air around them seemed to grow strangely still, as though the whole colony had paused to hold its breath alongside them. Daniel kept his arms loosely around Rennick the entire time, ready to pull him back the instant anything looked wrong, but the hatchling did not struggle. If anything, he seemed to lean into the touch, small and trusting, as though some part of him understood this was necessary. The memory reading, as Sella later described it to the council, was something like sharing a dream, not words exchanged but images and feelings passed directly from one mind into another. Thal remained still for almost 2 full minutes, far longer than Daniel expected, his expression shifting slowly from clinical focus to something colder, harder, and far more troubled. When Thal finally opened his eyes and stepped back, the scout's hands were trembling, just slightly, in a way that had not been there before. "It is worse than I feared," Thal said quietly, more to the massive gray dragon behind him than to the gathered humans. "What did you see?" Sella asked carefully. Thal turned to face the crowd fully now, and for the first time since arriving, something like genuine emotion cracked through the scout's controlled exterior. The nest was not destroyed by storm, nor by any human. It was attacked deliberately by another clan in the dead of night, using methods designed specifically to look accidental to outside eyes. Fire that burns without leaving the scent of ordinary flame. Claws that strike and retreat before any alarm can be raised. This was not carelessness. This was assassination. A murmur ran through the crowd, confusion mixing with unease. Daniel felt his stomach tighten, some instinct telling him this explanation was only the beginning of a much larger problem. "Assassination of what?" Daniel asked. "He's a baby." Thal's gaze settled on Rennick, and for the first time, something almost like sorrow passed across the scout's face. He is not simply a hatchling. His bloodline carries lineage to one of the oldest and most respected clan lines within the compact, a line whose voice has long opposed certain rivals seeking greater influence over border territories, including, I suspect, the very land your colony now occupies. If his entire clutch had been eliminated, and no survivors remained to inherit that voice, it would have left a path open for those rivals to claim authority uncontested. Sella went pale. "You're saying someone destroyed an entire nest of children just to remove a political obstacle?" "I am saying," Thal replied grimly, "that whoever did this intended to leave no witnesses at all, and they very nearly succeeded except for one small mistake." "What mistake?" Daniel asked. Thal looked at him directly now, something unreadable in those ancient eyes. They did not account for a human finding the one survivor before the cold finished what the fire started. If you had walked past that tree even an hour later, there would be no evidence left at all, no witness, no proof, nothing but ashes and a story easily blamed on your colony instead of the true attackers. The timing of the attack, so close to your territory, was almost certainly deliberate. A clutch destroyed near human land, discovered by dragons investigating, would have been simple enough to frame as human aggression, exactly the kind of incident that could ignite a war convenient to whoever orchestrated it. The full weight of what Thal was saying settled slowly over the square. Daniel had not simply saved an orphaned animal. He had, without any understanding of what he was doing, preserved the only living evidence of a conspiracy large enough to reshape relations between two entire civilizations. "So what happens now?" Sella asked carefully. "Do you believe us? Does the compact believe us?" Thal was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I believe what I saw in his memory, and his memory does not lie, not at this age, not in this manner. This human," Thal said, gesturing slightly toward Daniel, "did not harm the clutch. He is the reason any proof of the true attack still exists at all. Relief rippled through the crowd, though Daniel noticed it was tempered, uneasy. The way relief often is when a larger danger has simply been revealed rather than resolved. He looked down at Rennick, who had gone quiet and still throughout the entire exchange, watching Thal with wide, solemn eyes far older than his small body suggested. If someone tried to erase his whole bloodline once, Daniel said slowly, understanding dawning with a cold weight in his chest, what happens when they learn he's still alive? Thal's expression hardened. That, the scout said, is precisely what concerns me. Whoever ordered this attack believed they had succeeded. If word reaches them that a survivor exists, and worse, that a witness capable of identifying them through memory now lives safely in human care, they will not simply allow that mistake to stand uncorrected. The gray dragon behind Thal let out a low, rumbling growl, wings shifting restlessly, as though sensing the same danger the words implied. Sella's hand found Daniel's shoulder, gripping tightly. "You're saying they'll come here," she said, "to finish what they started." "I am saying," Thal replied grimly, "that this colony has just become far more important and far more dangerous a place to stand than any of you understood this morning." Daniel tightened his hold on Rennick instinctively, feeling the small body tremble slightly against him, not from cold this time, but from something closer to fear returning, as though some instinct in the hatchling understood exactly what kind of danger still lingered somewhere beyond the fields. "Then we protect him," Daniel said simply, his voice steady despite the fear settling in his own chest. "Whatever it takes." Thal studied him for a long moment, then, unexpectedly, gave a slow nod, something shifting in the scout's demeanor from suspicion toward something closer to alliance. "Then we had better prepare," Thal said, turning to look toward the darkening horizon beyond the colony's edge, "because whoever did this will not wait long to try again." Nights passed quietly, too quietly, the kind of stillness that made Daniel's skin prickle every time the wind shifted through the fields. Thal had stayed near the colony rather than returning immediately to compact territory, insisting that whoever had orchestrated the attack on Rennick's clutch would not simply give up once they learned a witness survived. Daniel had not argued. He had spent those 2 nights barely sleeping, moving Rennick's bedding closer to his own each time, checking the cabin windows more times than he cared to admit. It was on the 3rd night that the colony's perimeter alarms finally went off, not the long, steady wail used for storms, but the short, sharp bursts reserved for intrusions. Daniel was on his feet before the second burst even finished sounding, scooping Rennick up from where he had been sleeping curled near the heater, the hatchling waking instantly, a low, frightened chirp escaping him. Sella burst through the front door moments later, breathless, a hand light in her grip. "Something's moving along the north tree line. Not human. Thal already left to intercept, but whatever it is, it's fast." "How many?" Daniel asked, already pulling on his boots. "Reports say 2 shapes, maybe 3, small enough to move through the trees without triggering the outer sensors properly. The council wants everyone indoors." Daniel looked down at Rennick, who was pressed tightly against his chest, small body tense, eyes wide and alert in a way that made him look far older than his weeks of age. "That's not happening. If they're here for him, hiding in a house with thin walls isn't protection, it's a trap." Sella hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Then where?" "The old grain storage building," Daniel said. "Thick stone walls, 1 door. No windows big enough to matter. If we're going to hold a position, that's the best one we've got." They moved quickly through the dark colony streets, avoiding the main paths where alarm lights still flashed red, cutting instead through narrow gaps between buildings that Daniel knew from years of walking them at odd hours. Rennick stayed silent against him the entire way, small claws gripping tight to his jacket, as though some instinct told him that noise now could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Inside the storage building, Daniel wasted no time barricading the single door with whatever heavy crates and equipment he could drag into place, working fast in the dim emergency lighting, while Sella kept watch through the narrow gap left at the doorframe. "This isn't going to hold against a dragon," Sella said quietly, voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Not for long." "It doesn't need to hold forever," Daniel said, still working. "Just long enough for Thal's people to get here." He had spent enough years on frontier land to know that ordinary tools could still be dangerous in the right hands, and desperation made a person creative. He rigged what tripwires he could from spare cable, strung tight across the narrow approach to the storage building's door, each one connected to a set of old warning flares meant for signaling distant patrols. Not for combat, but bright enough, he hoped, to blind or disorient anything moving fast through the dark. It did not take long before they heard it, a low scraping sound just outside, claws against stone, followed by a soft, deliberate silence that felt far more threatening than any noise could have. Rennick pressed harder against Daniel's chest, a thin, frightened whimper escaping him despite his best effort to stay quiet. "They can smell him," Sella whispered, "can't they?" "Probably," Daniel admitted grimly. The first tripwire triggered moments later, a sharp flash of light exploding just outside the door, followed by a startled hiss and the sound of something scrambling backward across the stone path. Daniel used the brief chaos to peer through the gap Sella had been watching, catching only a glimpse of dark scales and glinting eyes before the shape retreated into shadow again. "There," he muttered, "small, fast, built for stealth, not brute strength. That matches what Thal said about the attack on the nest." A second shape darted closer from the opposite side, and this time Daniel was ready, yanking the second tripwire manually the moment its outline crossed the threshold, sending another burst of blinding light into the darkness. A sharp screech followed, pained and furious, and for a moment Daniel allowed himself a flicker of hope that his makeshift defenses might actually be enough to hold the line. Then the door shuddered violently under a heavy impact, crates groaning against the pressure, and Rennick let out a sharp, panicked cry that seemed to echo far louder than his small body should have allowed. Something in that sound shifted the air itself, a strange pressure building briefly around them, and the door shuddered again, this time from the opposite direction, as though something unseen had struck back against whatever had been pressing forward. "What was that?" Sella breathed, staring at the trembling hatchling in disbelief. "I don't know," Daniel admitted, holding Rennick tighter, feeling the small body practically vibrating with fear and something else, something instinctual and fierce despite his tiny size. "But whatever it is, it's helping." Outside, the sound of frantic retreat carried through the night, wings beating hard against the air, shapes fleeing back toward the tree line just as a much larger, more powerful set of wing beats thundered overhead, followed by Thal's voice shouting commands in a language Daniel did not understand but recognized instantly as authority. The storage building door finally burst open moments later, not from attack, but from Thal shoving the barricade aside with startling ease, eyes scanning the room quickly until they landed on Rennick, still trembling but very much alive in Daniel's arms. "They're gone," Thal said, breathing hard, wings folding tightly at their sides. "For now. But they will not stop trying, not until either the truth is proven beyond doubt or he is silenced completely." Daniel looked down at Rennick, who finally seemed to relax slightly now that the danger had passed, small claws loosening their grip on his jacket. Whatever instinct had flared in him during the attack seemed to have exhausted him, and his eyes were already drooping with sleep despite everything that had just happened. "Then we make sure it's the truth that wins," Daniel said quietly, exhaustion and determination mixing evenly in his voice. "Whatever that takes." Thal studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, something like genuine respect settling into the scout's tired expression. "Then let us make certain the whole compact hears it," Thal said, "before anyone tries this again. Word of the attack on Ashford Landing spread through compact territory faster than any message the Council could have sent themselves. Thal made certain of that, returning briefly to deliver a full account directly to the clan elders, carrying with it the memory Rennick had shared, the tripwire flares still scorched into the storage building's stone floor, and the testimony of a human who had held the line against trained assassins with nothing but old farm tools and a refusal to give up. It took 11 days for the Compact's judgment to arrive, 11 days during which the colony lived under a tense, watchful quiet, unsure whether the outcome would bring peace or war. Daniel spent most of those days exactly where he had spent every day since finding Rennick, close by, watching the hatchling grow steadily stronger, his scales deepening further into rich emerald, his chirps slowly becoming something closer to an actual voice, small words forming here and there in a mixture of draconic sound and something that almost resembled human speech, picked up, Daniel suspected, from spending so much time listening to him talk. When the response finally came, it arrived not as a single scout, but as a full delegation, 3 adult dragons landing at the colony's edge with a formality that made even the council members hold their breath. At the front of them stood an elder whose scales had faded to a pale, silvery gray with age, flanked by Thal, who looked, for the first time since Daniel had met him, something close to relieved. The elder's judgment was delivered plainly, without unnecessary ceremony, though every word carried weight. The clan responsible for the attack on Rennick's nest had been identified through the very memory Thal had recovered, corroborated further by testimony gathered from within their own ranks once suspicion turned inward. Their attempt to seize territory through deceit and violence had cost them any standing they once held within the compact, their claims stripped, their leadership disgraced before the full council of clans. And the human colony, the elder said, turning silver eyes toward the gathered crowd, stands cleared of all suspicion, and owed a debt this compact does not take lightly. A murmur of disbelief and relief swept through the colonists gathered in the square. Sella, standing beside Daniel, let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 11 days straight. "There is more," the elder continued, gaze settling now on Rennick, who stood a little straighter beneath that ancient attention, no longer the trembling, half-dead hatchling found beneath the tree, but something steadier, stronger, though still clearly young. The bloodline he carries is not a small one. By right, he could be raised within compact halls, trained among his own kind, prepared to one day reclaim the voice his clan once held in matters of great importance. Daniel felt his chest tighten at the words, an old fear rising even after everything that had happened, the fear that after all this, Rennick might simply be taken away regardless of everything they had survived together. He said nothing, though, understanding that this was not his decision alone to make, however much it hurt to admit. "However," the elder continued, and something almost like amusement flickered behind those ancient eyes, "it has become clear over these past weeks that this hatchling's survival, his safety, and indeed his very will to fight when danger came, are bound closely to the human who found him. Such bonds are not easily broken, nor should they be dismissed lightly, whatever tradition might normally suggest." Rennick, as though understanding exactly what was being discussed, moved without hesitation, crossing the space between the delegation and Daniel to press himself firmly against his leg, small but unmistakably decisive in the gesture. The elder watched this with an expression Daniel could not quite read, something between surprise and quiet understanding. "It seems," the elder said slowly, "the choice has already been made regardless of tradition." The formal agreement that followed took considerably longer to finalize than that single moment suggested. Weeks of careful discussion between council members and compact representatives, treaties rewritten, boundaries clarified, and a new understanding established between two peoples who had very nearly gone to war over a misunderstanding engineered by those seeking to profit from their conflict. But at the heart of all of it remained one simple, unshakable fact. Rennick would remain in Ashford Landing, raised alongside Daniel, with regular visits from compact teachers to ensure he learned what he needed to know of his heritage, while never losing what he had found beneath that broken tree in the storm. The old oak itself was restored in the months that followed, not rebuilt exactly, since nothing could undo what had happened there, but honored properly for the first time. A small stone marker placed among its roots bearing names in both human script and draconic sigils, a tribute to the clutch that had been lost, and a reminder of the one who had survived because a stranger refused to walk away from a crying, helpless creature in the rain. Daniel visited that spot often in the seasons that followed, sometimes alone, more often with Rennick beside him, now nearly as tall as Daniel himself, wings stronger with each passing month, though he still curled up near the heater some nights out of habit rather than necessity. "You know," Daniel said one evening, sitting beneath the great tree as the sun set gold and orange over the colony rooftops, "when I picked you up that night, I wasn't thinking about treaties or politics or any of what came after. I just heard something crying and figured somebody ought to help." Rennick shifted beside him, resting his head lightly against Daniel's shoulder, a gesture that would have seemed impossible from the terrified, half-dead hatchling found beneath these same branches months earlier. "Good thing you did," Rennick said, his voice steadier now, warmer, carrying just enough of both worlds in it to remind them both how far they had come together. Above them, the old oak's branches swayed gently in the evening breeze, standing witness once more, not to tragedy this time, but to the quiet, unlikely beginning of something neither dragons nor humans had expected, a bond built not from politics or treaties, but from one simple, stubborn refusal to leave anyone behind.